You know what my real Okay.
Do you like my notes?
Oh,
My computer. Yeah,
look, as opposed to mine, like, oh, good Lord. I'm not, is this yours?
Oh, yes.
Sorry.
Because my computer, I accidentally, like, I don't know what happened, and I was like, you know what, I don't care, I'm just gonna print it, because I printed this at home, and so I'm like, oh, well, at least I can see it.
Well, I didn't, like, I was like, okay, I'm not gonna read my notes. I just have sort of like, just sort of
Recording in
Just-
progress.
basic notes for me.
Yeah.
But it's
It's a lot.
been a while since I've done a presentation like this. So,
Yeah,
well, because of the pandemic.
yeah.
Okay, if everybody can have a seat.
He's like,
Okay, is the mic, there we go. There we go.
If
Everybody can have a seat. We're going to go ahead and get started for our next session, which is our investing in people.
Thank you, Trustee Kehoe. I'm Laura Guglielmo, the Assistant Executive Officer responsible for the Business Services Group. And joining me today is Jasmine Bass, Senior Staff Counsel. And to her left is Carly Intoya, our Director of Human Resources. And together we are really excited about sharing our presentation today about diversity, equity, and inclusion. In our hour and 15 minutes, we have a packed agenda. We'll be briefly talking about our strategic priority, investing in people, and specifically objective number 7, which challenges us to create a diversity, equity, and inclusion framework. We are calling that framework the LEAD initiative, LEAD, and we will talk about that in detail. It has 4 pillars that talk about our employees, our members, our business partners, and our community partners. And at each one of those pillars, we're going to talk about where we are today in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and where we see ourselves going in the future. And we will give trustees an opportunity to provide input at each one of those stages. So there'll be four places where we stop the presentation and specifically solicit your input. We'll stop that for about 5 minutes, and I believe there'll be a timer on so we can kind of track our time. I apologize in advance for limiting that time because we could really talk about this all day. But we do want to make sure we get to our next steps. What are we going to do with the information we get from you today? And then also we have a fantastic panel of LACERA staff who have volunteered to come up here and share with you their personal experiences, their professional experiences, and how those, how the LEAD program will help them connect to our, as employees, to our members, to our business partners, and to our community partners. So we have a full agenda. Oh, and then final opportunity for comments, questions, and direction from trustees. So this slide was discussed earlier today briefly during Lewis's presentation this morning. It's the investing in our people strategic priority. And really, in essence, this is all about making LACERA an employer of choice. How can we attract and retain the very best people? And one of the objectives is this objective number 7, the developing and implementing a diversity, equity, and inclusion framework. And, you know, there's a lot of fear, I think, about what that means. And one of the things we want to make sure that everybody realizes, our staff, our partners, our trustees, is that DEI is not about excluding anyone. It's about making room at the table for everyone and their ideas and their perspectives. And it's interesting as we go through the discussion today, there have been a lot of conversations that really, I saw a lot of parallels to what we're going to talk about today. So we'll be talking about that, and I'm really excited. So when we thought about developing a DEI framework, it's a little bit overwhelming. Like, where do you begin? So we began in the best possible place, and that's by listening. So we did, with the help of KH, we did staff surveys. We had a staff survey that was actually done prior to our strategic planning initiative. And then we did another survey as part of our strategic planning initiative. And we had action planning teams that talked about what it was like from an employee perspective. And those conversations and those surveys were really pivotal. People didn't necessarily use the terms diversity, equity, and inclusion, but they certainly talked about the concepts when they talked about career advancement, culture, how LACERA can be a better employer, and what they need as employees. We also talked to our members. We did member surveys and got a lot of information. We talked about that earlier today in the member experience, and you'll see a lot of parallels. And all of you talked about how can we think about all of our members? Who aren't we thinking about? When we were talking about that vision statement, right? And there was discussion about, well, wait a second, that's only talking about members who are about to retire. And the idea that we have members from, you know, cradle to grave that we are supporting, so, and beyond. So we want to make sure that our members are included, and we're thinking about them specifically when it comes to their diverse needs and making sure that they feel included in our plans here at LACERA. And we listened to you trustees. You responded to the surveys as well, and the comments that you've made in other meetings and today. We're incorporating all of that information into our initiative. And so I'm excited to introduce Jasmine Bath to my left. Jasmine joined LACERA last year, and she came from LA County, where she was involved in the county's anti-racism, diversity, and inclusion initiative, or ARDI. And so she came to LACERA with this passion for this subject and joined Carly and I, and we really had so much fun developing this program. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce, oops, I skipped a slide, but I'm going to skip it. I'm just going to go with that and introduce Jasmine.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Laura, for that introduction. I appreciate it. I'm really excited to present the proposed LEAD initiative. It's something I'm very passionate about, something I believe in, something I stand for. So hopefully you can, buy into this as well. The LEAD initiative is being proposed for many important reasons. I'm going to discuss 3 of them. It reflects the critical importance of establishing and maintaining a positive and welcoming work culture that encompasses attracting and retaining employees, creating job satisfaction, and fostering employee engagement. 2, it's to provide our members the best service in an inclusive manner. We touched upon that this morning. Our members' needs are fluid, can be fluid, and we need to make sure that we can meet them as their needs change. Number 3, teaching our business and community partners about the proposed LEAD initiative and setting an example that diversity, equity, and inclusion is not a choice, but something that LACERA demands. So importantly, what does LEAD stand for? Well, let me tell you. L is to lead effectively. We want to integrate the proposed LEAD initiative into our work culture by emphasizing the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion. E is to ensure equity. We at LACERA are committed to fair treatment and access to promotional opportunities for everyone, regardless of their race, their gender, their religious affiliation. That is not a factor. Everyone should be entitled to those same opportunities. A is to achieve inclusivity. Inclusivity is essentially diversity in practice. And we are committed to practicing diversity by welcoming all groups. Finally, D stands for drive diversity, which means LACERA will seek representation of different and unique identities, characteristics, experiences, and perspectives. Now that concludes a summary of what LEAD stands for. I hope you have a little better understanding of the proposed LEAD initiative. I will turn it back to Laura.
So thank you, Jasmine. That was a great summary. And one of the things we thought you trustees and some of the audience members may have a question about is what about our TIDE initiative, right? Because our investments division led by CIO John Grable and supported through with the Board of Investments has created an initiative toward inclusivity, diversity, and equity. Inclusion, diversity, and equity, or TIDE. And it's a great program, and we don't want to lose the momentum, but it really is focused more toward our investment division and our investment partners, whereas the LEAD initiative is more of an organization-wide initiative. And if you think about it, we were challenged by Trustee Moore, right, in his equity motion in 2020 to make DEI a more organization-wide, a more operationalized initiative. And so this is, we really are inspired by his motion and those initiatives. So the TIDE initiative really focuses on investments. It has 5 pillars: internal practices, which really focuses on investments division, internal practices for promoting and walking the walk when it comes to DEI. Due diligence with our investment partners, those organizations and companies that we invest assets in. Active ownership and supporting diversity, equity, and inclusion through active ownership. Capital formation, meaning where we allocate assets towards organizations that support DEI. And industry advocacy, which is really about LACERA being a leader in this space, promoting and educating the financial services industry to incorporate DEI. LEAD has 4 pillars, and that we talked about a little bit already, that our employees, our members, our business partners, and our community partners. And when we're talking about business partners, we mean more than just the folks that we invest our assets in, but our business to business vendors, the different organizations that we spend money with, that we support through our business relationships. And in our community partners, we mean, our local community, like here in Pasadena and LA County, but also our sister pension funds, sort of that broader community and nonprofits that support diversity, equity, inclusion, and letting them know that we here at LACERA, whether we're talking about investments or member operations or anything in between, we stand for equitable and inclusive treatment for all. And one thing that both TIDE and LEAD share is a tenet that DEI leads to better results. So we are excited about exploring that further. Back to you, Jasmine.
Thanks, Laura. Now that you've been provided an overview of the proposed LEAD initiative and how it complements TIDE, Hopefully you guys are all excited about the LEAD initiative. Let's talk about how we plan to build upon the foundation already in place here at LACERA and how we will effectively lead to ensure diversity, ensure equity, achieve inclusivity, and drive diversity throughout our organization. As Laura mentioned, LACERA's proposed LEAD initiative touches on 4 pillars, which you can see on the right side of the slide. Sorry, next slide. Oh, sorry about that, Laura. Employees, members. Wait, I think that's the next. That's no.
I think it's a slide.
Is it? Okay. Employees, members, number 3, business partners such as vendors and the business partners that LACERA invests in. And 4, as Laura touched upon, is community partners such as sister pension funds, nonprofits, and professional organizations, as well as our local community here in Pasadena. In this presentation, we will discuss our current DEI efforts in each of these 4 pillars and solicit trustee feedback about how to expand LACERA's efforts over the next 5 years. I'm going to turn it over to Carly, who's going to discuss the first pillar, which is our employees.
All right, good afternoon. Good afternoon. And good afternoon. Okay, so our employees are our first pillar. And one of the questions we'll be asking repeatedly today is, what does a better tomorrow look like? What does our future look like? What can we do to get there? So our vision for our employees is to build inclusivity for staff that will help aid in retention and recruitment. Okay, next slide. So first, we're going to start with where are we now? So we can talk about how we get from where we are to where we're going. This slide presents information about our staff members that was gathered from employee records, not self-reporting, and that's important because it comes up later. As we look at LACERA staff today, we see a very diverse organization reflective of the community and members that we serve. LACERA's geographic location, the variety of professions that we employ, the government, public industry, all have us starting in a really, really good place. Well, a good place in terms of diversity, at least. And so other organizations might see this and say, hooray, we've gotten it. We are going to check the box and we are going to move right along. However, if we were asked, what are we doing to encourage diversity? Or how are we actively pursuing a diverse workforce? I'm not sure what our answer would be. So for example, if I asked, what is LACERA doing to better or to encourage gender expression, or to make those who don't identify with binary gender categories welcome at work? I don't know what the answer would be, because currently we don't even ask about non-binary choices, right? So simply asking the question, something active, moves us forward. We actively will be trying to include people, not passively excluding them. Okay, next slide, please. So this slide also presents information. Oh, one more. Sorry, no, not you, me. I have to turn one more page, not you, Laura. Okay. So this slide presents additional information about LACERA staff members. So let's talk more about tomorrow and what tomorrow can look like if we actively pursue diversity, equity, and inclusion. Do these various groups feel supported? Do they feel safe at work? Are they fully engaged at their jobs? Do they see a future for themselves at LACERA? So we know from a recent employee survey, so Laura mentioned that we work with both KH and CPS to gather information from our staff members. A very high number of respondents did not feel comfortable reporting information such as age, gender, and ethnicity. So they just left those questions blank. So what we're presenting here is from our employee records, but doesn't that point out a problem that they don't feel safe or like they should identify themselves when telling us their opinions? So we have a little bit of work to do. So if we were at the organizational maturity level we desire, every employee, no matter how they identify, would feel safe and they would feel included. They would feel welcome just as they are, and they would feel supported in achieving their professional goals. So we have some work to do in these areas. Next slide, please. As we focus on the employee pillar, let's examine where we are today and what our vision for building a better tomorrow might look like. LACERA benefits from many of the merit-based outcomes other public sector organizations have historically benefited from. LACERA practices equitable application of employment policies and fully complies with all applicable laws and regulations and ordinances such as SERL, Americans with Disability Act, and FEHA. Our recruitments are competitive. They are impartial and job-related. All candidates, both open, external candidates, and promotional, internal candidates, have an equal opportunity to display their readiness and preparedness for the position. Assessments of employees are based on job-related factors. Our job classifications are organized to group similar work and provide equal pay for equal work. Our pay ranges are advertised and transparent, right? So they're online for everyone to see, and they're on every bulletin that we post. In terms of employee programs, LACERA offers numerous programs and generous programs to help advance our current staff members. Some of those things include a very generous tuition reimbursement program. We have a formal mentorship program. We offer internships, and we offer training to employees who want to further develop themselves and experiment with career development programs. All of these things aim to help our current staff grow. All of these things are great, and we're not starting from zero. So that's good news, right? That's good news. But we shouldn't be satisfied just because these things are not enough to make us stand out as an exceptional employer. So we must constantly ask ourselves, what are we missing? Who was at the table? Who's not at the table? How can we do better? And how can we facilitate more equitable and inclusive recruitment channels to those who want to work here? So as part of the strategic planning sessions, we had various APT teams with employees ask various questions, took in their feedback. And some of the feedback that we got was interesting because it didn't exactly come out as needing DEI specifically in a DEI framework. But what came out is that they wanted to see a better work culture here at LACERA. So we received specific feedback on items such as developing and expanding career ladders, expanding succession planning, expanding internship opportunities and programs, and expanding individualized career development plans, and of course, more transparency. So transparency has come up a lot of times so far today, and it looks like both our members and our staff members would like us to be more transparent. Okay, next slide. So, trustees, now we're asking you, what are some of your ideas for how we can build and support a more welcoming and inclusive work culture? This is the lead up to the first interactive questions. Okay. Okay, so all of you have different personal and professional backgrounds. You all have different experiences, as well as differing amounts of time providing leadership at LACERA. So we're going to ask, what are we missing? Who are we missing? And how can we do better moving forward? So for those who are participating remotely, just raise your hand and we'll be keeping schedule for a 5-minute session.
I'll open it up. Armin?
So kind of to respond to your question, I have to ask a question.
Uh-oh.
And where are we with the internship programs? You know, Mr. Moore's motion included expanding the internships or education to high school kids, because we found out that unless we get some of these kids early on, they may not be attracted to this industry. So where are we with that? Did we get the high school pieces up and running, and what about college? And what are we doing with that?
Okay, so I'll start with the college and internship piece first. So last year, our internship did not receive a lot of applicants, really. I think that Mr. Grable placed either 2 or 3 in the last calendar year from now. Yeah, 1 calendar year ago. HR managed to hire an intern that panned out for like a month. We had expanded, much more visible recruiting efforts for the internships, contacted colleges directly, contacted programs that contacted college programs that whose majors were directly related to some of the programs that we wanted to fill here at LACERA. It was not fruitful. Last year was a very interesting time for non-permanent employment. So we saw a dip in the level of interest for internships and a dip in the level of interest for temps. So although last year was not successful, and we actually did a couple of 2 or 3 different renditions of flyers. Communications helped us put out different things that might be more attractive to our non-typical applicants. Really not a great response. But just because we didn't get a great response once doesn't mean that we will not attempt again and attempt differently. So we are continuing to pursue many more internships outside of, let's say, traditionally outside of investments. Investments has always had a great pipeline. So I think this coming, budget spoiler alert. This year we're requesting, so I had to look for direction if I could. So this year we're requesting 11 interns for the next fiscal year for 2023 to 24. So we're anticipating better success then. In terms of the high school preparedness programs. Okay, so there were 2 parts to that. One was a simple outreach, right? Making LACERA better known. And then second, an educational component. So I specifically reached out to a couple of high schools in greater LA, because I won't say that they're all local, some of them were a little bit further, that had magnet programs that were finance-based, business-based. We didn't get a great response. 2020 to 2021, pandemic was still going. So our options for interactions were limited. What we were able to do, though, is on the community outreach side, our staff was able to participate with 2 different schools in interviewing like prep and helping them, I would say, score their final projects. So you had some community outreach, not the community education that Mr. Moore so advocated for.
What about being part of the career counseling that they have? The kids, before you graduate, they have a career program where they invite different organizations to make presentations, have a table, and things of that nature. And I think at the high school level, if we are able to become part of the speakers bureau, so to speak, to come in and make presentations to the senior class or something like that, to begin to expose them of the opportunities that we have here, not only in investments, but elsewhere, including retiree healthcare. So I thought that maybe that's what.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I think to summarize that is a recruitment efforts. So how we can improve and enhance our recruitment efforts.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I actually started, I was on our recruitment bureau when I first started out in the organization, and went to a lot of those because I came on at 18. So they wanted me out there for the high school and early college students. And we got a lot of interest in that, going out to actual career fairs, going and doing presentation in classrooms. The bottom line is that I think LACERA needs to have a team that's what they're doing full time. That's what the sheriff's department did. And that's why it was a focus. So if LACERA had that recruitment side that actively went out there and did it, Because when you reach out and you say, hey, this is what we are, let your students know. If we're lucky, we'll get an email out to people and nobody looks at them. But if we're physically there on site and doing it, I understand pandemic and stuff, but we're beyond that. And I think we can move beyond that. So.
Just to follow up on Mr. Kehoe's point, I think one suggestion I will have is to being able to reach out to, let's say, Mr. Moore, other retirees who have been involved in LACERA, who understands LACERA, and maybe they can volunteer to be speakers or just provide some sort of volunteer program.
Yeah, to the chair,
Yep.
we
Mr. Craig.
have participated in, I think Mr. Gittens actually participated in counseling some youth in terms of the importance of saving and importance of retirement, and they were younger high school students, I believe. I believe we also
You're right.
participated in the Southern California Edison had I think it was on a Saturday. I remember I sat
I went
through
to that one.
And so we have participated in those types of activities, not to the level that we would like. I think that, we probably need to take a look at Carly and figure out whether or not we can put together a team that does that specifically. I think we can do something like that. It will take a little bit of time, but and we have reached out to Trustee Moore. So we have a list of agencies that he had recommended that we reach out to, and we have reached out to the agency. We're in the process of identifying the internship numbers. And then once we do that, we're certainly going to launch it aggressively and try to get as many students as we possibly can. So those are the things that we have done in the past.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to ask if we can table this and we can have a further conversation. And we certainly want to hear from trustees and staff and more on this, but we do want to make sure we can get through the rest of the presentation if that's okay.
I'm going to I have two people. So let me
Okay.
get the two people that were pending and then we'll
You got it.
take you up on that, Antonio.
Thank you. I'll be quick. I am assuming that these internships are paid. We
They
haven't
are.
said that, but I'm assuming that they are.
They are.
Thank you for that. And then has there been formal communication to Pasadena Unified? Like Pasadena City College?
Definitely
Summit?
Pasadena City College, not so much. Oh, well, yes, the two of the schools that we participated with were in PUSD. So both Pasadena Unified and PCC.
It's tough. I can only imagine with the recruitment effort, how difficult that is during a pandemic, right? Let's acknowledge that. That's big. My union, we're at job fairs all the time, so we get these requests often. But I'm sure you're getting them too, so that there's just something that's not connecting there.
It would be helpful if you could share the job fairs that you're attending. I'm not sure if they're trade related, but if there's a carryover that you think or a connection to the finance side and pension side, we'd be more than happy to.
I think there is,
jump
that we
on
can
board.
make that connection.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
And I also want to move us beyond just the investment side of the shop. I mean, we're a customer service organization. We're a quality assurance organization. I mean, there's a lot of things that we do that we can bring people in. And a lot of people might be thinking one direction, but they get here and go in a different direction. So we're definitely, we can incorporate a lot of efforts. I got Mr. Jones in queue as well.
Good afternoon. I hope the lunch was as tasty as Trustee Kehoe was making it sound. So on the issue, and I appreciate the attention to the front end of the pipeline on the perhaps the youth or entry level. I think another important component to the degree that I've been involved with it in larger organizations is the intense attraction and interest on the entry level is typically there. A lot of energy is spent, but then you typically have lose people along the way as the culture beyond recruitment once people get there is unsatisfactory, and so you lose them. So I would want to make sure a couple of things, and you're probably already doing this, so I don't mean to say this as if it's not happening. Is one is I think making sure that as the research says, most people don't leave companies, they leave managers. So it's important that managers have the right incentive and the right skills for kind of managing DE&I scenarios through there. Secondly, as it relates to the promotion landscape, making sure that, and I'm hoping as an organization that much of our upwardly fill hiring needs are actually coming from internal versus external to the degree that can happen from a skills development and career development standpoint. So making sure that the hard work that's gone into recruiting people, that we're moving those people along and they continue to populate and provide good context for new D&I people who may be coming in on that piece. And so that's really what I would share there is, again, very easy to put a lot of energy into the initial step. But secondarily, I think it's important that young people, when they look at the organization, they see, oh, hey, that person started here, that person has already jumped 3 places, that person's here. It gives a little further affirmation that for the long run, this is a place where they could be successful. So thanks for.
Thank you.
And then I also have Mr. Rose.
I looked at the internship page on the website. It's very impressive. I would just say, of my experience in helping other companies, you may want to re-examine your compensation levels. The $13 to $18 compensation level for interns is probably the barrier for attracting more people.
Thank you. Okay, sorry, I know we took a little extra time on this, but it's always good to get the interaction.
That is certainly okay. We could talk about it all day for sure. And I know it was a little bit condensed. At the same time, I do want to encourage trustees, continue to give us your ideas. So send us emails. We can talk about it in board meetings further. We want to make sure that the dialogue remains open. It's not one and done. So our next topic here is our members. And we talked a lot about that earlier today. Our idea around membership and DEI is really about providing that superior member service. And we talked a lot about the diversity of our members and their unique needs. So it's really important that that we see the connection between DEI and our members and why that's important in everything that we do. So in order to truly understand our members' needs, we really need to think about them as individuals. So we're going to talk a little bit about what we're doing today. We talked a lot about that in the last session under member experience, that highly personalized service, the individualized counseling that we do, and the ways we've been changing the way we provide that service. Our new website and our My LACERA portal are ADA accessible. Our member service center is ADA accessible because not all of our members can physically get into our space or they may have transportation challenges. So thinking about that, but at the same time, as we're going down the digital road, there are members who have a digital divide. So these are the challenges that we will see going into the future that we need to think about, plan for, anticipate, and adapt to. So we have a lot of work to do, and it's a continuous process because we learned through the pandemic, things change outside of our control, and our member experiences and expectations are going to change. Fortunately, we know that there's a lot of technology and technology is evolving. So we're going to be looking at leveraging that. So we got a lot of feedback from our staff on our action planning teams about ways we could do a better job of meeting our members' needs. Leveraging technology was a huge one. So I'm trying to rush this because we did talk about this a lot already, but we want to think, we got a lot of feedback from our staff about how we can do better. Now we really want to hear from you, trustees, how we can do better serving our members going forward. Are there members we're not thinking about? We talked about their journey at the different stages. Trustee Santos, you mentioned, this morning, how are we outreaching to the newest members and preparing them that, yes, they're going to get a retirement, they need to plan for it, but they better plan for a little bit more than what LACERA can provide, right? So those kinds of things, who are we missing What are we missing? What should we be thinking about? And can we do better? So, Mr. Kehoe, if you could
I will
entertain.
Open it up. Any comments focusing on members versus staff?
I have another question and continuing this digital thinking. Do we have an app? Like I can look up my 401k and look at this and my other retirements with an IBW. Is that something being thought about?
You want to take that, JJ?
So, yeah, Trustee Sanchez, that's part of kind of that digital strategy is having a mobile application where you can have that accessibility. One of the things I do want to add, and I know it wasn't covered, is also our content strategy. We realize that English is what we produce and publish, but there's also English as a second language. And I know that's going to be an effort of ours in the coming year as it relates to our publications and making sure that they're not only in English, that we also offer Spanish and other, languages that are heavily spoken within our demographic.
And to add on that, not even just the language in terms of what dialect we're speaking, but our choice of language, certain words that might not be intended, but might make someone feel excluded. We want to make sure that our language choice is really intentional so that as we're educating our members, they're understanding and they're seeing themselves as we're describing a situation, that they feel like their situation was anticipated and welcome, and that we've thought about their needs throughout their journey.
Have we done any surveys to see if there is a language barrier? I know we're bringing up a discussion, but have we actually identified a language issue?
No, we haven't. I mean, just is just traditional of where we're at today, right? Since you have to speak English in the county to work, we've always approached that. We do offer Spanish support in the call center. Because, obviously we're in Southern California, so we have a large population of Spanish speaking individuals, mostly for the survivors and beneficiaries. The other large language we don't offer support currently for, and it'll be a topic of discussion going forward, is, and I always mispronounce it, so please forgive me, Tagalog? Tagalog. I can never get that right. I have tried for years and I apologize. But that's also a significant population, especially working for the county. So, yeah.
Got it. So it sounds like we could prioritize too, like the outreach for the survivors would be the focus versus internal documents and things. Yeah, perfect.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Mr. Kryman, did you have a comment? Or you? Perfect. Sounds good. I heard somebody else. Was that Jason?
Thank you. Yeah, the language is definitely key. I know as a first responder, the county has contracted with a phone company. You can call it any hour of the day.
I think it's called Language Line, something like
put
that.
them on speaker and whatnot, which might fill the gap. And it might not be the actual employee, but their significant other, in the event of a death benefit, they might be trying to navigate through something. The other thing, connecting with the employees and members, America is great. California is an extremely diverse place. And as a government entity, we mirror the population that we serve and the employees of LA County. And when you're talking about inclusion, I don't know if this is appropriate, but you said there's a limitation to the data because it comes internally from LACERA. So to, I guess, ensure all employees feel included, what tools could you guys implement within the rules of the county board of supervisors, by state law, to encourage employees to divulge that so that they could be accommodated? Might be a very private thing. That would be something, and then that goes hand in hand with the membership / employees.
So one of the things we were talking about are the standard employment forms that we use. Haven't been updated in a while, but there was a period of time, probably at the beginning of my employment, not at LACERA, but in public service, where, you didn't even have a box, for example, for multiracial multiracial box. And that puts people in a position where they would have to choose if there were more than one race. That's kind of where we are today when it comes to gender. Historically, there's been 2 boxes to check, male or female. Today's employees, particularly people coming in to employment, aren't necessarily seeing themselves in that. So by having another option for them to identify, tells them we anticipated that this may be you and that you would be welcome in this environment. So that's just one example. So we haven't updated our forms in a long time, and we're not sure if what the county's forms look like. So thinking about those intake forms that we get at the beginning of employment, how can that can be a pretty simple fix to start to get that information so that people don't have to actively say, I'm this, I'm that, but they see from day one, they're welcome.
Yeah, that was what I was leaning into. You know, it is county policy, board of supervisors policy, and state law, and they don't an employee does not have to divulge that information.
Absolutely.
At their sole option. So that and other things, but yeah, those are the kind of things that, you know, for employees and membership, they go hand in hand, I believe. And if you have a plan for that, that's great.
Is LACERA privy to the county reasonable accommodation requests? And if not, perhaps that would be something that we do on the onboarding when we're bringing people on so that they can request that, and LACERA can meet those needs as well.
Yeah, I believe we do, correct?
So we do get access to the county's reasonable accommodation.
We employ we employ a similar process, right? Whereby during both the application process and on the new hiring process, we ask, do you have a need for an accommodation? What can we do to better help you through the application process or as you were hired? And then if the answer is yes, then we employ the same mirror parallel process that the county does, the disability.
Interactive process.
Yeah, they have a new name, disability management and compliance process. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think that captures everything that we're looking for. If somebody's applying and they have any type of accommodation from, you know, physical to language barrier to those kind of things, they can make those requests. LACERA would flag it, identify it, and then we know whenever we're interacting with that member, these are the things that we should do to help accommodate them. So I think, and then that, I mean, you can't be any more inclusive really than that. I mean, you're giving them the opportunity to ask for everything, and we're going to provide that to them. So, yep. And in 10 years, it's all going to be AI anyways, talking to everybody. So we'll be sitting in a chair somewhere. Opening up for additional questions on this topic. Anybody online with any questions? Keith?
I guess I had one thing in terms of diversity. I also think about the diversity of jobs in the county. We talked about it a little bit this morning, you know, between firefighters and deputy sheriffs and such. And I think of active members, you know, and whether they have access to a computer on a regular basis. They're obviously not, you know, as able to get online. Maybe I don't know. I'd be curious in terms of what are we missing in terms of surveying members to how often they have access to, you know, a computer to engage the website or My LACERA. You know, an app would be helpful, but, you know, even then, you know, some of our staff, and we're office based, you know, I know they struggle with accessing some of these things, let alone, you know, grounds maintenance workers, folks in the field at Public Works, et cetera. So I'd be curious to see stats on that.
Absolutely. Great.
In digging in with regards to the different groups, the language that we use is key. Are we going to use Latinos, Hispanics, Latinx? And some people like me, I don't like Latinx. I think that's terrible, but it's just me. So as you move forward, take a look at that. You know, I remember being in an organization where they gave me a couple thousand Latino names and said, go talk to them. And probably 50% of them were Filipinos.
Right.
Because they have the same last names
Sure.
or similar. And so it's typical mistake.
Mhm. No, understood. And yeah, it's a complex situation, a complex challenge to figure out how people prefer to be addressed, which is really the most important thing, right? We all have our preferences and they may be different, keeping that in mind.
I know JJ, you're up, but Antonio, you had a.
Well, a couple of thoughts that come to mind. I recently sat through our sexual harassment awareness training in my office, right? So we go through this every 2 years. And we had a long conversation about pronouns. And I wonder if that's been had with the employees here, because the truth is a lot of us, some people just don't understand it. It's not that they don't respect it, but they don't understand it. And we need to have that conversation. That's one point I wanted to make.
Absolutely.
The other question is, and this wouldn't be applicable to my members, but I imagine that if we're trying to get to the members and better serve them, you have good relationships with the various unions and you attend their picnics and whatever events they have, and you're present in that way.
Yeah, that's part of one of the partnerships we're talking about is community partnerships, and that includes organizations like our employee unions and other affiliate organizations. There are a lot of employee organizations that our employees are members of, and our members are members of, and they are a great resource to connect and make sure that we're reaching them and that they feel part of our family as we're serving them.
I have JJ.
Oh, the pronoun issue was what I was going to bring up. We definitely need to educate ourselves. Proper pronoun usage is today, so you're not assuming things. One of the things we could do is indicate what our pronoun is to begin with, so that people feel comfortable, like bringing that up to us. He or she, and then there are a lot of non-binaries, they, and things like that. So we can start by changing the way that we identify ourselves, so we make a comfortable work environment. And this wasn't part of it, but we will go to union events anytime we're invited. So SEIU does a really great job. So any of the other unions out there, I know some of the safety unions also will invite us to their events. So yeah, we're happy to go to those and make those connections with our members anywhere they are. Thank you.
And Chair Kehoe, we can move it along to our next topic because we
Perfect.
do want to
Feel
have time
free.
to do
Yep.
our panel
Feel free, move
presentation.
us along.
Thank you. Okay. Jasmine, you're going to talk about our business partners.
Oh, I'm a community partners.
Yep, that's me.
That's,
I'm sorry, I walked from there to here and forgot what I was supposed to do. So our third pillars our third pillar is our business partners. So by business partners, we mean the companies we do business with, our vendors who provide services to LACERA, as well as companies that we invest assets with. As we lead by example, as we lead, LEAD, lead by example, and demonstrate our commitment to DEI, we encourage our business partners to take a closer look at their own policies, their own procedures, and their own practices in the DEI space. Why? Because we think that it will lead to better results for our members. Put another way, as we do better and as our business partners do better, our members will benefit. So let's take a closer look at where we are today and our vision for collaborating with our business partners to build a better tomorrow. Okay, so in 2020, Trustee Wayne Moore introduced a motion for an equity initiative. The Board of Investments, in collaborations with the Investments Division, adopted the TIDE initiative. But Trustee Moore's motion went beyond our investment partners. He and the Board of Retirement continue to encourage LACERA to expand their DEI framework to include all of LACERA through an administrative equity initiative. So who are some of our administrative business partners? They are our actuarial consultants. They are our communications consultants. They are trainers, they're external auditors, and they're vendors who implement software systems. They provide LACERA a variety of services, and we spend a lot of money with them. In the fall of 2022, LACERA started asking potential vendors in the RFP solicitations to share their DEI policies if they had any. So for many years in the past, we've already asked about like litigation issues or any other lawsuit types things to help us better assess our risk. And these issues, excuse me. Right, and additional issues are currently being evaluated as part of our competitive assessment process for awarding RFPs, bids, and contracts. Okay, so we're back to the questions. We've made great progress in this area by continuing to ask other partners for the DEI policies and to help us better evaluate their risk. But what are we doing? Are we really doing enough to encourage our business partners to have an authentic DEI policy, authentic DEI practices? Or are we simply by asking them, just wanting them to give us something so that we can say that we asked? So our questions now are, should we be asking different questions? Should we be asking additional questions? And how can LACERA be better leaders, LEAD leaders in this space? So let's take another few minutes and discuss how we can better engage with our business partners.
I'll open it up. Keith, go ahead. Yeah, now I'm opening it up for discussion.
Okay, thought you're going to kick it off. One thing that I had mentioned before to Mr. Rice was I thought it would be helpful at some point for trustees to get a better understanding of what we could ask of vendors and what we could not. Because I think that's important, especially when we went through the Tide initiative. I know at times I became confused, just kind of intermingling investment opportunities and firms with non-investment, related firms that we were, engaging. And I think we need to really understand what the boundaries are legally that we are allowed to, kind of walk up to and push the best we can. I think asking for policies is great, but I think we need to understand what we can and can't require. And then the other point I would make is just a concern I've mentioned over the years is the number of evergreen contracts with businesses that just we've been in business with forever. And I don't think that necessarily speaks well of our willingness to engage non-traditional businesses, women-owned business, minority-owned business, veteran-owned businesses. So that's where I see the bigger need to make a push is in marketing the business opportunities with LACERA, us as trustees being in a position to support those efforts, but understanding what we can do.
Additional comments?
Yes. One key, something to keep in mind is that, when we go out, the experience that we have earned through the investments is that a lot of times when the report comes in, especially at the beginning, when the report comes in and a particular potential partner doesn't have a robust DEI policy. And the tendency was to reject that. And I was always concerned with that because we should not be rejecting these people, but rather partner with them so we can continue to influence them in changing the policies and or adapting something similar to what we have. So it's really, you are more powerful when you're at the table than when you're not at the table. So if you reject them, you will never be able to change the behavior. So something for us to keep in mind in evaluating the potential partners.
Thank you. Mr. Bernstein.
Yeah. I want to speak to sort of an opposite perspective of Mr. Knox's. I thought Mrs. Sanchez was here, but I think she left for the afternoon. She, in the past, spoke quite eloquently about the risks that vendors and other suppliers can sort of shift their less appealing actions to third parties and look better on paper than they actually are. So I'm skeptical of some of the metrics for evaluating companies. What does concern me historically, and I think it's been particularly true in how we've looked at financial managers, which is of course a consideration for the BOI, but our standards for who we find acceptable are sometimes, in my opinion, designed just to weed out a lot of smaller operators. But in doing so, many startups are minority and women-led. I think we just need to be really rigorous about making sure that when we have qualification standards, they serve a legitimate purpose and are not just a first line of weaning down the applicant pool. To me, that's an area where we regularly probably lose people who could do the job, but don't actually get to bid on it because they don't meet our minimum standards.
Thank you. I have Frank.
Sir Kehoe, I can't hear the speaker.
We have a microphone coming right now.
Okay.
Mr. Bernstein, I had the exact same point. Make sure that our process doesn't leave out small businesses who are perhaps family run and very good at what they do.
Thank you.
Perfect. Additional comments on the vendor side. Good.
A couple of comments. First of all, with respect to Mr. Knox's question about boundaries, Jasmine is our LACERA employment lawyer and will work to understand those boundaries and communicate them as appropriate. Additional points would be it's important to understand the DEI profile of vendor, not just at the time of the RFP process or at the time of selection, but during the life of the relationship. So one thing that we've been doing with our outside law firms and legal division is we are conducting periodic diversity surveys of our outside counsel, which has been very enlightening, actually. It's also possible to engage with outside vendors on joint DEI initiatives. For example, Mr. Grable joined with our fiduciary counsel, Ashley Dunning at Nossaman, to participate in a DEI webcast that the Nossaman firm was hosting, and that gave an opportunity to broaden our footprint and engage with our one of our vendors on DEI issues. And then finally, and this may be I think this is requires some conversation, but we should be willing to take the risk to encourage our vendors to put forward their diverse staff members in the boardroom, in positions of responsibilities, in engagements, and not just have a picture or a name in an RFP or on a team, but actually see it manifested in the engagement, whether it be in the boardroom or in the work that's done for staff.
And I think that ties in what Mr. Sanchez is saying on helping to influence the organizations that we work with. Okay, I think we're ready to.
We are
move us
really
along.
running out of time. So I'm going to skip our community partner discussion. And I am going to, indicate that we're going to report back to you in April. And the idea is that we're going to measure our progress and come up with some specific goals as we move forward. We will be developing a specific work plan around DEI, probably several work plans over the years as we develop these goals. So your feedback is really very much appreciated. But I want to leave time for our panel, who are amazing. They really were inspiring us as we discussed it. So I'm going to step up, but we're going to welcome our panel and up to the table. And Carly, would you like to introduce them?
Absolutely. So we have a few brave souls here today who would like to talk to you a bit about DEI and their experiences at LACERA. So come on down. We have DDA Acevedo, who joined LACERA in 2019 and currently works in our investments division. We have Allison Barrett joining us online. She joined LACERA in 2015 and works in our disability litigation division. Jasmine Bath, who you've heard from already today, joined LACERA in 2022 and works in our legal division. Tamara Caldwell joined LACERA in 1999, working in HR, and eventually transferred to our Disability Retirement Services division, where she has worked for the past 21 years. Elsie Gutierrez joined LACERA in 2004 and works in our Administrative Services division, supervising the document processing unit. And Danny Hay joined LACERA in 2012 and works in Disability Retirement Services. So as you can see, our panelists today represent a broad cross-section of LACERA staff. And through their unique lived experiences and current and past roles through the organization, they're going to share with us their ideas and perspectives to help inform the LEAD initiative. So the first brave souls that I have questions for, let's see, are Danny and Allison. Okay, so can you tell us, based on where we are today, what would you like to see LACERA do to move DEI forward?
Thank you, Carly. You said it best. You said it's time to be active. While we're certainly a diverse group, it's time to activate the I in DEI, inclusion. People want to be seen, they want to be heard, understood, and valued for who they are. And I'm hopeful the LEAD initiative will be open to and encourage all staff to get involved across all divisions and create safe spaces for us to show up authentically and share our unique stories and perspectives, because that's what makes life and work meaningful. And perhaps those spaces can include affinity groups with ally members. And we also need, ready for it, 3 words: education, education, education. People don't know what they don't know. Historically, our diversity training has consisted of outside attorneys advising us how to not discriminate against protected classes. And I think the initiative could provide education in a manner similar to that the board received a few years back, where there were open, honest, and sometimes hard discussions. And these discussions that we all need to have, they must be ongoing and earnest, and not something we do every 2 years to simply fulfill a diversity training requirement. And lastly, I just want to say that the fact that we're having this conversation and that I, as a member of the LGBTQ+ community, was warmly and enthusiastically encouraged to participate demonstrates we are certainly headed in the right direction. Danny, my friend, back to you in the studio. What are your thoughts?
Thank you, Allison. Good afternoon, board members and executive staff. My name is Danny. My pronouns are he, him, his. I just want to start off by saying that LACERA is a great place to work for. It's an organization that has provided me with many great opportunities as a whole. Little bit of a backstory, funny story. 6 years ago, I was appointed to my first advisory board by Councilmember Horvath, now supervisor for the city of West Hollywood. At that time, she had asked me, what do you do for work? Where do you work? And I said, I work for a place called LACERA. Immediately, she said, oh my God, I've heard of so many great things about that place. I've heard county employees want to jump ship and move to LACERA. And I said, oh, wow, that's probably true. And then I thought about that. And our CEO was one example. Jasmine is another example. So what Supervisor Horvath said at the time seemed to ring very true. So I'm very grateful for my time at LACERA.
You don't even know.
And with that said, any great organization can always strive to be better. That's the goal in life. That's how we get better. That's how evolution happens. Do we have diversity as an organization? Yes, we have a lot of diversity. I can speak to that myself. And do we have inclusion? I think that's something we can work on continuously. Today's meeting is just a great example of that. We're taking on the issue to improve ourselves, to move on, to be more inclusive. And what else can we do? I would say more internal investment in our infrastructure to guide diversity, equity, and inclusion. work, such as tools, resources, capacity building, cross-divisional collaboration. That sort of ties into what Allison was saying about continuous education. We bring in external law firms who talk about sexual harassment, what you can and cannot do. Maybe bring in a law firm to discuss other types of equity and inclusion. That might help staff as a whole, as an organization. And also lastly, I feel the organization can begin to acknowledge and celebrate people's diversity, people's differences amongst its staff. This can help to create a much safer space so that staff like myself or other individuals can be their authentic self so that they can do their best to better serve our members, because that's what we're here for ultimately in the end. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Tamara and Elsie, how would the LEAD initiative impact your staff, and what can we do to make sure they don't get left behind?
Okay, well, this one. Danny's going to be a tough act to follow.
Probably have to bring it closer.
Closer to you.
Okay. That's what happens when you're short. Thank you, Danny. Okay, so this is going to be Danny's a tough act to follow, but I would say for my particular team, the LEAD program is going to create just opportunities for them to grow in their career. You kept on asking throughout your presentation, who is missing? And I got to be honest with you, and I got to say the entry-level staff is missing. Every single time that I hear a discussion, it's always like, what can we do for, no offense, the investment department? What can we do for our legal office? But I never hear anything of what can we do to promote from within. And what I'm talking about is nobody's aspiring to be the next, CEO. I'm just saying we want to have a career that keeps us engaged and that helps us, be proud. And I think if we can provide those type of opportunities to entry-level staff, you will resolve part of the retention issue, definitely the recruitment, because more people will hear about the opportunities that are being offered. And I think it'll also help you with your succession planning, because you're going to be preparing a whole group of internal candidates that can be qualified to move up to the next level, right? So for me, it's all about education. It's about having equal access to training programs and to also have career development. Thank you.
All right, I guess let me.
I think if you start talking into it, they'll get the mic on for you. So just start talking.
In preparing for this, I actually surveyed my team. And I asked them, did they feel as though they belonged? Did they feel included? And the majority of them said yes. Their issue, very similar to what Elsie was talking about, was that there was no opportunity for them to take a step into some of the higher positions. And interestingly, for my team, several of my lower level staff, just to get their foot in the door, they took positions that were entry level positions, but they're degreed. They do have some outside work experience, but the issue is when they try to promote into some of these higher positions, the way that the classifications are structured and the way that the desirables are listed and all the essential functions, they're not able to qualify. And I'm not sure why that is, but it'd be nice if we could take a look at that and figure out why they're not qualifying, although they may even have higher education than some of the folks who are actually in some of these jobs. So that's one thing I think this LEAD program will do, where we can take a closer look at how we're developing our staff and providing growth opportunities. I also wanted to mention on our list here, there were a couple things that we didn't mention, and this is more on the member side. And folks who are hearing impaired, how do we, reach them? Folks that can't see. And the reason I bring this up, because this last week we had a couple members contact us, and one in particular was blind. She never told us. And so we kept sending her these documents, asking her to fill them out. And we kept sending them to her email. And finally, we closed her application and ultimately indicated that we're closing it because you didn't comply with our requirements. And she ended up calling the department called me, and then I ended up reaching out to her and we learned she's blind. And so the question became, well, how do we assist her? We can't keep sending her the forms and expect that she's going to be able to sign them. And so we've been able to link up with her and her son. We are going to send her the forms. We're going to clearly highlight the area that she needs to sign. And of course, he's going to work with her to sign those documents. But that showed me that we have a greater responsibility to assist those folks who have other disabilities that aren't often considered when we have them fill out documents and log into websites and things of that nature. So that's another consideration in terms of our membership. And lastly, one other thing, and I'll leave this, I think, for everyone to kind of think about, and this was something that Ricky and I were talking about. We had attended a seminar some years back, and one of the comments was, there's a welcome sign over my door, and I talk about I have an open door policy, but when you step to my door at the bottom, the mat says do not enter. And I would hope that whenever we're servicing both our members and our staff, that that is not what they see when they try to access our services or access our time as leaders. And so in thinking about today's seminar, it really made me realize as a supervisor, I need to do more. And I want to make sure that my team knows that they have a voice and that they are heard. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next we'll hear from DDA and Jasmine. So can you tell us, why is the application of equity and inclusion important for a business, especially as a business that works with other businesses? So we talked a little bit about business to business and a little bit about engaging with our business partners.
And just for time management, we are on the end time, so let's go ahead and wrap it up
Fantastic.
with these questions.
So trustees and good to see everyone. So the business that we serve in the investment department is incredibly simple. We want to take money and make it grow into more money so that we can pay benefits. But the actual work involved to do that is incredibly complex. And similarly, diversity, equity, and inclusion seems really simple. We want everyone to have equal access. We want people to feel included. They want there to be representation of our workforce that looks similar to the slide that we had up earlier, which is, what our members look like. But that's also incredibly complex. And so when we talk about equity and inclusion, the work that we do to make businesses better, as John Grable would say, is we ask, we probe, we agitate, we work with our business partners and we ask them, do you have a harassment policy? Do you have an inclusion policy? Do you have the building blocks that help us set up a good diversity, equity, and inclusion profile? We can work on the demographics over time. The demographics don't change overnight, unfortunately. But having the policies in place, having the recruiting practices in place, and having the right frameworks in place that allow people to move through organizations is how we try to influence our business partners to just be better. And I'll be brief in the interest of time.
Do you want me to, do I still have time?
Yes, please do.
Okay, I'll be really brief. Essentially, it's important to allow everyone to have a seat at the table. I mean, from a business standpoint, you have a decision-making process that involves individuals from various backgrounds with different experiences. Therefore, you will have a decision-making process or decision that is well thought out, and representative of the individuals that it serves. So essentially, that's it.
Perfect.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, panelists. You guys really took a lot of bravery for you all to come out and talk about your experiences and give us your opinions. And I think it really helped inform the conversation. Thank you, trustees, for your incredible input and conversation. This is not a one and done, right? This is an ongoing dialogue, an ongoing commitment that we have as an organization. So I think we have a lot of really exciting work to do together. And I hope you are all feeling like really energetic about this initiative, because we certainly are up here.
Perfect. Thank you all.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. Okay, we're going to take a break and we will be back at 3 p.m. for our final panel.
Recording stopped. Recording in progress. Recording stopped.
Are we live?
Recording in progress.
Okay, if everybody can please take a seat. We are in the twilight hour here, so no pressure to the panelists that are gonna get us all out of here on time. So, which is 4 o'clock. So let's go ahead and get us going, and I'll turn this over to Mr. Rice.
All right, thank you, Chair Kehoe, trustees, and everybody else. This session of today's offsite will focus on compliance and enterprise risk management as part of LACERA's risk governance structure for fund operations. The purpose of this presentation is to introduce concepts and the broad outline of the plan that staff proposes for LACERA. So there is an educational component to this because there really hasn't been a presentation like this given to the boards before. It's an important subject. There's a lot to it. And so we will be doing both just from some basic familiarization with the area of compliance and the area of enterprise risk management, and then laying out the plan. We will come back to the board in the future with additional information, more details about what is proposed, and get additional direction. This presentation, should note at the beginning, will not address investment risk. That's a separate subject that's addressed separately by Mr. Grable and his team with the Board of Investments. However, the discussion today does relate to processes and controls that apply to fund operations supporting the entire organization and all of its divisions. All of the public entities and businesses on this slide have one thing in common. They each had serious and widely publicized problems that might have been avoided or addressed before becoming front page news if they had better compliance, risk management, and values. To further the performance of LACERA's fiduciary duty, the strategic plan to be presented to the board for approval will include goals and objectives to enhance compliance and enterprise risk management. We use the word enhance deliberately because there are existing efforts in these areas that we will acknowledge while presenting ideas to make the approach to these areas more intentional, more disciplined in all parts of LACERA's organizational chart. For our presentation today, I will start by covering risk governance, and compliance. Richard will talk about enterprise risk management, or ERM, And then we will have scenarios and discussion with our panel, Christina Logan, Barry Liu, Roberto Van Nortrik, and Bernie Buenaflor. We will appreciate questions and comments throughout from the trustees, management, and the rest of the audience. With one exception, we're not going to pause for trustee comments, but fire them away whenever anybody wants to raise their hand. We will have one interactive session in a few minutes. We will begin with risk and risk governance because they are foundational to compliance and enterprise risk management. What is risk? At its highest level, it is any factor that may interfere with realizing organizational goals. Fairly simple. Risk may be operational in resulting from failure of processes, people, and systems, getting a little bit more nuanced. And as a fiduciary, we should be concerned with fiduciary risk, which is the risk that occurs when an agent engages in conduct that affects the agent's performance of their obligations to their principal. As a fiduciary serving members in a highly regulated business, LACERA has reason to focus on operational and fiduciary risks. Risk can have a combination of impact and likelihood. Risk management should take into account both of those factors, impact and likelihood. An organization may decide to devote resources to a high impact risk that is not very likely to occur or has a low frequency of occurring because the consequence of that remote event occurring is so great. And business continuity, disaster recovery are examples of those sorts of risks and the resources that are devoted to that type of risk based on its impact. Or on the other hand, a business may choose to prioritize risks because their frequency itself causes too many ongoing problems and too much risk to the operations or delivery of service. So an example of that is LACERA's daily member service and benefits operations. Both of those areas are a high frequency risk environment. Assessment of the balance between the impact of a risk and its likelihood of occurring should be important to the boards and management in deciding our organizational priorities. So I mentioned a minute ago we'd have one kind of formal interactive session, and this is it. We're proposing that the board, management, and everybody else in attendance engage us in an interactive mini risk assessment. This is not the way a regular risk assessment would be done. It would be more deliberate, but to get an idea of what is on everyone's mind, just kind of spontaneously as to non-investment risks facing the organization, this might be a productive exercise. So the risks that you can be thinking about can be operational, they can be law or policy, they can be fiduciary, they can be business environment, anything that you can think of that create risks for our fund. And we will try to do this for about 3 minutes. I left 28 slots on the slide. We'll see if we can fill those up.
Data security.
Data security.
Benefit fraud.
Benefit fraud. Lawsuits.
Attrition of good people.
Attrition of good people. Thanks, Vincent. Was there another comment over here? Providing inaccurate information. Good. Human resources. Physical injury.
Data quality.
Data quality.
Employee behavior.
Employee behavior. Workplace violence.
Data breach.
Data breach. Non-compliance with rules and regulations.
Business continuity.
Business continuity. Regulatory.
Environmental risk.
environmental,
Reputational.
reputational risks. What's that? Tax?
Violation.
Tax violations,
Legislative risk.
legislative risk. Change in our plan document.
We've got 1 more minute.
Got 1 more minute. Actuarial experience. Media coverage, negative media coverage. Public opinion,
Loss
Ben?
of confidence.
sorry, Laura,
Confidence.
loss of member confidence,
Public contracts, vendors,
public contract and vendors, financial statement integrity,
Investment loss.
investment loss. We're going to stay away from investment, but that's certainly true. Don't want John to jump up here. Plan sponsor,
Think of it themselves. Our operation.
relationship with plan sponsor, authority, plan sponsor authority. Frank? Public what? Public disaster? Yeah, public disasters. Yes, snow.
All right.
All right, very good. All right, so that was great. Thank you all for participating in that. So this mini assessment shows the wide range of risks that LACERA faces and should be addressed within its risk governance structure. We talked about legal risk, we talked about operational risk, we talked about factors in the environment, things maybe within LACERA's control, maybe things that are not necessarily within LACERA's control in terms of them occurring, but maybe within LACERA's control in terms of preparing for that risk occurring. Risk governance is a continuous process because the risk environment is constantly changing, and I think the mini risk exercise demonstrated that. An improved risk structure is necessary and will be helpful, but it's not a panacea. Equally important are ethics and values, which also must be given attention and can be given attention concurrently with the compliance and enterprise risk management program. The risk governance structure that is proposed for LACERA is the Institute of Internal Auditors IIA 3 lines model. And I think a lot of the trustees and maybe some of the staff have seen this graphic before, but we really haven't talked about it. The model starts with the boards at the very top, which are accountable to stakeholders and oversee management of the entire operation. Integrity, leadership, transparency, and accountability are core board level values that set a tone at the top. Under the boards is executive management. Management is responsible internally for addressing risk. Under management are 2 types of divisions. Over on the right-hand side are first line divisions. And on the other side of them, under management, are the second line divisions. The first line divisions are the divisions that deliver services to our members or to our other stakeholders. The second line divisions are divisions that have a role in the monitoring of risk and other risk-related matters. The first and second line divisions are overseen by both executive management and ultimately the boards. And we will relate the first and second divisions to LACERA's organizational chart on a separate slide in a moment. The third line is an independent line of management, which is internal audit, and it provides independent assurance as to the adequacy of management's risk controls and functionally reports to the audit committee. Internal audit also works with external assurance providers, such as our financial auditors. The service LACERA provides to its stakeholders, most importantly our members, depends on the success of each of the 3 lines in managing risk. In the 3 lines model, compliance is the responsibility of executive management through both the first and second lines. The first line is involved in compliance by performing their jobs in a risk-aware way. The second line has direct responsibility for the oversight of compliance activities. So graphically here, that's the first line, and the second line reporting to management, and that's the compliance function. Graphically on the 3 lines model, ERM is a partnership between management and internal audit. Richard will discuss this a little bit later, but this partnership is done to identify and manage risks in a way that doesn't compromise internal audit, and there are guardrails that can be put in place that Richard will talk about to ensure that that takes place. These shapes show the separateness of these two different functions, compliance and ERM, but also the overlap of them, and the point of overlap is management, executive management. Why will we focus on compliance and enterprise risk management? And we were drawn to this quotation from a compliance educator that makes the point really well. They're the brakes that should be built into LACERA's organizational machine to ensure that we work safely to arrive at our goals. So the point of this is, just like brakes in an automobile, compliance and ERM need to be integrated into the organizational machinery of the organization. They're not bolted on separately or bolted on later. They're integrated into everything we do. So now we'll spend a little bit of time talking separately about compliance. Simply put, compliance is following an organization's laws, regulations, policies, and procedures. This sounds very simple, very obvious. That's what we want to do. We want to follow the rules. But in reality, it's a very complex process to manage and requires constant attention because LACERA's legal and policy framework is complex. It's changing, and without a proper compliance program, it can be easy to slip up and miss or neglect an important rule by, for example, not providing regular training or failing to update a policy. On a cultural level, compliance is a mindset that recognizes the core value of being compliant. On a functional level, compliance is an executive management responsibility supported by the first and second line divisions. It focuses on the avoidance of compliance risk, which is the risk that controls are inadequate or not followed. This slide shows how LACERA's divisions are roughly divided between the first, second, and third lines. And as you can see, it's not a formally organized structure. It's very loose. There are strong first line divisions delivering services such as member services, disability retirement, retiree healthcare, communications, for example. There are also second line divisions that focus on risk oversight responsibilities. Legal, quality assurance and metrics, information security are examples of second line divisions. But we also have a whole host of divisions that are listed down at the bottom center of the slide that straddle the first and second lines. They are involved in delivering services. They have first line responsibilities, but they're also heavily involved in managing the risk that relates to matters that are relevant to their assigned responsibility. We also then have the third line, which is in a defined box over on the side with the internal audit division reporting to the audit committee. As you can see from this chart, there is no defined compliance structure. There's no defined first, second line set of roles. There's no single point of leadership over the compliance function. And that is something that the proposal that we're making aims to correct. We have no formal documented compliance structure. We have no full-time compliance leadership, such as a compliance and ethics officer that oversees, monitors, measures, and reports on compliance and ethics. If a compliance leadership structure is built by management, it will elevate, strengthen, and organize the compliance function. The compliance officer also will provide a strong counterpart on management side to the third line leadership that is provided by the chief audit executive. And that's an appropriate balance of powers between the compliance function and the internal audit function to have staff of relatively equal authority interacting with each other. These are some of LACERA's existing compliance structures. But as just noted, they function without a compliance charter or a dedicated compliance officer to guide, report, unify compliance efforts. In addition to the IIA, many of the best ideas about compliance come from the federal sentencing guidelines, and that may be surprising. The reason for this is because in considering sentencing of a corporation or corporate executives, the Department of Justice and the courts will look at the strength of a defendant's compliance efforts. If the compliance program is strong, it may support a lower sentence by showing an intent to follow the law and that a criminal act may have been an aberration that will not be repeated. On the other hand, if there is a weak compliance structure, it could suggest a disregard for the law, risk of another violation, and support a higher sentence. The DOJ has issued very detailed guidelines to its prosecutors for the evaluation of compliance, and these guidelines and the sentencing guidelines have become a benchmark for private corporate compliance programs and public sector compliance programs, which is why we bring them to you and emphasize this to you today by way of this background on the subject of compliance. The DOJ's compliance program, its guidelines are centered around three questions. Is the entity's compliance program well designed? Is the compliance program adequately resourced and empowered to function effectively? And how does the compliance program work in practice? And there are many factors under each of those questions, and we're not going to go into all those factors today, but we will cover them in future presentations as the compliance program is built out. Generally, however, both the IIA guidelines and the Department of Justice guidelines center around 6 elements of a strong compliance program. The first is leadership and ethical culture, including a compliance and ethics officer that is empowered to exercise leadership, oversight, monitoring, and reporting, have that authority and the responsibility. Second, risk assessment, and this is an area of overlap with ERM, to identify risks that may be mitigated by compliance efforts. This element ties into ERM, as I said, and Richard will also elaborate on this in a few minutes. Third, strong policies and internal controls. Fourth, regularly scheduled, high quality and effective training and education on risk governance, ethics, and individual laws and policies. Training should also provide staff with compliance roadmaps. Fifth, monitoring, reporting, and compliance program evaluation. And finally, enforcement, remedial action, and lessons learned from organizational experiences, which in turn feeds back into the beginning of the circle with a continuous feedback loop that keeps the program fresh, improved, in a cycle of continuous improvement.
Steve,
yes,
and I might jump ahead where you're going to answer this question, but can you also address how this is different than our internal audits, quality assurance, and all of those components?
Yes, and I'll just go ahead and address that. So compliance is on management side of the organizational chart. It's not independent from management. It's part of management. It's on management side of the organizational ledger. Internal audit is an independent function. Now the chief audit executive does report administratively to the chief executive officer, but not functionally. Functionally, the internal audit and the chief audit executive report to the audit committee. So they provide independent assurance. Compliance doesn't do that. Compliance is involved with the nuts and bolts. It's really a very tactical, there are strategic elements, but it's a very tactical function of ensuring that day to day, the processes are in place, including all the 6 steps that were on the previous slide of ensuring that laws, regulations and policies are followed. Internal audit comes in separately to examine the adequacy of those controls and report on its findings as to the adequacy of those controls and then recommendations for improvement. So in a way, you can view just like internal audit is a check of management in all operations, that would also make it a check on compliance. Does that
And then quality assurance would be a component of compliance?
Quality assurance is, an interesting division, and maybe Bernie should handle that. Before he does, quality assurance has a relatively narrow focus currently. That may change, but it's focusing on benefits issues. But Bernie, why don't you answer Chair Keenan's question?
Sure. I think that's correct. Quality assurance is narrower. It's sort of like we are the ones that are inspecting the product before it goes out the door to make sure that it meets our quality standards. And these are usually predefined based on the law and our procedures. But we are that inline inspection of the actual work product versus the ones that will do the assessment of the entire culture of the organization, like internal audit would do generally.
Got it. So compliance would make it so that internal audits has less that they have to catch, right? Because it's kind of the goal.
Hopefully, if compliance is successful, it would lead to fewer findings and recommendations by internal audit. Yes, compliance is organization wide in terms of organizational operations. It has a broad mandate in terms of making sure that organizational policies and also laws and regulations are followed. Any other questions about compliance or risk governance before I hand it over to Richard to talk about enterprise risk management?
Probably should have asked how you change the slides. Press screen, right. So I think this will kind of reiterate what you just asked there, Sean, as well. I was going to say that Steve talked about the 3 lines model that the IA proposed. And what's most important to understand is that the responsibility for risk management lies with the first line, management. And in this context, management is really from the executive level down through aligned with all of the divisions and staff. That's in that context, we're talking about management's responsibility for the first line. And CalPERS has a great presentation they provide to all new staff that come on that provides their responsibility for ERM at the entry level. So everybody's responsible throughout the organization. But the key thing to understand in this presentation is that first line is a management responsibility. The board provides governance and oversees the organization, but management is responsible for achieving the goals of the organization through the establishment of processes, internal controls to achieve the objectives of the organization. Internal audit is independent. It's said, I've seen said in that 3 lines article by the IAA, that the functions of compliance and ERM are management's tool to challenge themselves on their effectiveness in compliance and in risk management. Internal audit is the board's tool to challenge management on their compliance with these things. So that's where internal audit is independent, because we report directly to the board through the audit committee. What's most important as I begin the discussion and go through the slides is that when we talk about ERM, we're talking about the process and framework that supports the first line in managing risk. Risk assessment facilitated by ERM are the functions, are function as risk assessments facilitated by the ERM function are management risk assessments. Every year, internal audit performs our risk assessments. We do risk assessments every year as part of our audit process. That's to develop our audit plan. But that's not truly a management risk assessment. In fact, when Lewis talked about Weaver and one of the audits that they did last year, which was evaluating the organization in terms of maturity, and one of the areas they looked at was in our risk management maturity. They give us, at some level, we're at the initial, at some level, even touching on repeatable practices that we have in the organization for risk management, but we have never done, they give us no credit for having done a management risk assessment. So ERM is going to build that framework around which the organization and management will do their own assessment of risk in the organization. So again, ERM is the, I got to change the slide, hold on, there we go. So definition of ERM, and this is one that I found, I didn't cite it, it was actually Wikipedia, but I thought it was a pretty good one. Enterprise risk management in business includes the methods and processes used by organizations to manage risk and seize opportunities related to the achievement of their objectives. And I thought it was really encouraged today to see in the pillars of the strategic plan that's been developed by LACERA, the passion and enthusiasm by the groups that preceded us today in really looking for those opportunities to improve the organization and manage the risks of the organization. So risk management is something that LACERA has done. I mean, we're 85 years old this year, right? I think 85 years. And clearly we've provided, provided, protected the promised benefits for 85 years. So risk management is something that we have. ERM is going to build that framework to challenge that and make sure that we have consistency in performing the risk management function. Some of the risk, I might have mentioned some of these already, but some of the current risk initiatives that you see, the development of a strategic plan. This is a great initiative in the organization recently. The formalization of the Information Security Office. We had Bob Schlaffelt and Matt, and I think they're in the process now of hiring a permanent Chief Information Security Officer. And that is a huge step forward in terms of a risk initiative in the organization. We've had business continuity and disaster recovery, but there's been a continued effort at making sure that we test those processes. And we suddenly were tested in the last few years through COVID. Cyber efforts to protect ourselves, third-party data, cyber liability insurance. These are all risk initiatives that we've seen. The establishment of the policy committee. And another article I read talked about the fact that some of these risk initiatives, when you don't have a framework around ERM, is that they can be siloed. And I don't know if it's really fair to say that risk is siloed at LACERA, because there's a lot of things that go across. There's this communications, Cynthia and her group, in terms of member communications, ensuring that there's consistency. But risk management further ensures that there's no silo development of risks and ensuring that risks are just done not in a siloed type of effort. This, and I guess the big question that may come is how can internal audit, because we are the third line, we're independent, how do we also participate and do enterprise risk management for the organization? We, internal audit, have participated in the peer group forum, the pension forum on risk management. And it's got some of the top pension funds in the country participating, Texas Teachers, CalPERS, CalSTRS. And you see different levels of maturity in the ERM programs. And most of them have independent ERM functions, but there are a number of organizations and where ERM does fit under the umbrella of internal audit. This graphic shows on the left side, the light blue, those are those first line or the traditional third line efforts that internal audit participates in, evaluating the risk management processes in the organization, giving the board's assurance that risks are correctly evaluated. I won't go into all of them. The dark blue at the top, those are the second line functions of the enterprise risk management, giving advice on identifying and evaluating risks, helping to establish that risk matrix, performing that risk, that management risk assessment for the organization, holistic reporting on risks, building the framework of risk management in the organization. And then on the right side of those things that internal audit will need to stay away from, those are first line functions, setting the risk appetite, imposing the risk management processes, developing the processes to achieve the goals of the organization. That is not something that internal audit can do. That's clearly a first line function. So the COSO framework, and this is pretty conceptual, but I think it's somewhat intuitive. On the left side, you've got the mission, vision, and core values of the organization. I always get the P's in the wrong order, but produce, protect, provide, produce, protect, and provide the promised benefits, essentially, and the direction the board gives in overseeing the organization results in strategic development. We have a strategic plan, and then from that, management creates the operations and establishes the business objectives that all the divisions follow. There's implementing and performance of the functions, paying those promised benefits, and that ribbon represents that it's an up and down process. And we developed our strategic plan in a very democratic way all the way through the organization, I guess, having everybody participate. And this, what enterprise risk management provides for, is a continual upward feedback to the board, to executive management, and which can affect the strategic plan and make adjustments to the plan based on the feedback you continue to get. Another model is the ISO 31000 framework, maybe a little more. This one, I was going to say a little more intuitive, but just a different approach. You've got your stakeholders on the left, and that's your board or members. You've got established goals and context for your operations. You still identify risks, analyze the risks, identify controls to those risks to result in your residual risks, estimate those risks, to evaluate them, treat the risks, monitor, provide reports back to the management and the boards, and then the cycle continues. You go through that cycle of continually evaluating your risk management framework. So keys to the success of a formal ERM program. Board and executive sponsorship is vital. It has to be a top-down direction. And, this is one of the principal priorities of the strategic plan. And I think that's great. I've been very enthusiastic about us getting to this point and developing a formal compliance and enterprise risk management function. So second is clearly define goals and objectives. And one of the first steps that we'll do, I think, both on the compliance side and the ERM side, is developing an ERM charter. Buy-in has to be obtained throughout the organization at the division level. Dedication of resources and time. This is another, like we don't have enough time already to do everything. This is another function. So it's definitely going to take a dedication, training for program participants and champions. There'll be champions at each division level. Champions will be assigned to the enterprise risk management function. The goals of a formal ERM framework, Essentially, the ending result would be a risk-aware organizational culture, alignment and integration with strategic plans and goals, aligning resources and efforts to the highest priority risks. And key is that ERM is not an add-on function. It needs to be integrated into the risk governance framework of the organization. From a human resources perspective, I talked about the board and executive sponsorship. There will be establishment of an executive risk committee at the executive management level with participants from various parts of the organization. Enterprise risk management program will be led by internal audit, and we'll have to make sure that we follow create the firewalls to ensure that we segregate our second line role there from our third line assurance role. And again, the establishment of divisional champions. So that's from a human resource perspective. It's going to take a dedication of staff throughout the organization. Real quickly, I don't have much time left, but these are some of the key terms that you'll see as we move forward and bring things back to you on risk assessment. The concepts of key risks, which are similar to as key performance indicators. Key risk indicators are kind of an inverse of each other. Risk appetites, risk tolerances, risk and control registers, identifying gaps in risks, even where we have initiatives to improve processes, looking at your processes through the vision of these risk registers helps to identify gaps, and then we can establish in our reporting and dashboards that we present to the board and to the executive management risk heat maps. There'll be training provided. Some of the low-hanging fruit is just providing training to the organization on risk and internal control awareness, as well as fraud risk awareness. Next steps, we have to get the audit committee fully behind us and supporting it. We're sort of threading a needle here. The board has got the strategic priority, and I'm talking about that, but we have in our package to the audit committee next week, we have in our budget request segregated out the enterprise risk management part of our audit plan for the next year, as opposed to our traditional audit process. I talked about the firewalls, low-hanging fruit. There are definitely great tools out there. Gartner makes one of them, I know, but they're great enterprise risk management and GRC system application tools that we can make use of. And at some point along the line, I think it's going to be really beneficial for us to engage a consultant to help us design enterprise risk management at LACERA, Ernst & Young, Grant Thornton, Gartner, and others. And then finally, I just have on the reporting and dashboards that is part of the cycle of reporting on risk management. This is a Gantt chart that it really applies to both compliance and risk management. And it shows that I won't go through the different lines. I think about halfway down, roll out training to the organization, division champions to work with and develop action plans, monitoring, reporting, and update action plans, and targeted training and continuous improvement. Those functions will cycle. We'll probably go through different iterations of those processes. But I think the plan is, from what I understand, a 3 to 5 year implementation process. So I think now we're going to move to the panel, and I'll ask the panel, starting with Barry, just to introduce himself, and everybody do their introductions, and then we'll have some questions for the panel.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Barry Liu, I'm the Legislative Affairs Officer. I've been at LACERA for about 20 years. I actually started out with Louis Gittins and Stephen Hawaii in our training class. Over the past 20 years, I've started member services, went to benefits, also worked in disability retirement, and finally here in legal.
Hello, trustees and members of LACERA's management. I'm Bernie Buenaflor, Chief of Quality Assurance, formerly Benefits Division Manager, and formerly Internal Audit.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Roberta Van Ortrick. I'm the Interim Admin Services Manager. I've been with LACERA for 14 years, and I moved to the admin services position temporarily from human resources.
Good afternoon. I'm Christina Logan. I'm a principal internal auditor. I started with LACERA in 2015.
All right, so the first question will go to Barry. So Barry, you were in benefits for many years to help implement new mandates such as PEPRA. Most recently, you spent several years as legislative affairs officer and has seen benefits from that side and the need to develop legislative fixes to address gaps in the legislative structure. You're also part of the team in the legal division that reviews benefits processes. What are the compliance issues that you've seen raised by benefit operations, new mandates, and ethics?
Thanks, Steve. So actually in your question there is a good distinction. There's ethical compliance and also operational compliance. So I think broadly speaking, ethical compliance is something that's consistent across organizations in terms of ethical conduct because it's reflective of human values and norms of behavior. So, and also it governs duties to others. So, you have a duty to others and you're not going to business for yourself. And in terms of ethics, people generally know the difference between right and wrong, but then there's a difference between knowing the right thing and doing the right thing. And so, trust me, bro, is not the best way to enforce, ethical human behavior. And in one of the earlier slides with all those bad headlines, you can kind of see, a lot of those things were a combination of ethical and operational failures. And as a result, some groundwork has been laid in place. For example, with the city of Bell, with public pension funds, that you have things like the Code of Ethical Conduct, conflict of interest, statutes, revolving door restrictions, mandatory training. A lot of those kind of sprung out from those, ethical and operational failures. Now, when you talk about operational compliance, that would be unique, based on your industry. What we do in public retirement would be different from, say, hospitality in terms of the hotel here or manufacturing. So I think operational compliance for LACERA kind of ties back to our mission, producing, protecting, and providing the promised benefit, because those three actions really encompass compliance and risk management. Job one for us is providing the promised benefit. So, everything we do in the organization sort of just funnels down to that, making sure that the member gets that check in the correct amount at the end of the month. That's really what everything we do leads up to. So our number one, I think, job of compliance is our plan document, SURL. I mean, that's like our recipe book and our cookbook. And that compliance happens on the federal and state level. So for example, on the federal level, we're a tax qualified plan. We have to, do certain things to remain tax qualified. And the IRS even has self-correction and compliance programs for us to remain compliant. And then on the state level, again, it's our plan document. We have errors and omission statutes. We also internally have a administrative appeals process, and all of that goes towards, being operationally compliant, which is, again, comes down to just paying the correct benefit. And you can kind of see this each month in your operational oversight reports, where, for example, the COLA accumulation project, that's to make sure that our members get the correct COLA. The Alameda adjustments, that's to make sure that the correct salary amounts are being used to determine the benefits. So, so that's basically, broadly speaking, in terms of ethical and operational compliance, and kind of some of the issues that I see with that.
Great. Thanks, Barry. Thanks, Barry. Christina, on the first slide of the presentation, we have the logos of companies and agencies that had experienced risk management failure. Are there common threads that LACERA should think about in enhancing its enterprise risk management?
Thank you, Richard. So we're trying to get back to the slide just so you guys can recall the different scandals that we were referring to. But overall, first I want to talk about just the goal of risk management really is to protect assets by understanding the bad things that could happen while emphasizing the good things that we could do. And so the important thing about all of these really is the culture In the first model that Richard showed, the ERM COSO model, that first area is on governance and culture. That's a really important key principle of enterprise risk management, making sure that you have the right culture so that everybody, there's this acronym for ERM, that everybody is a risk manager. Everybody who's involved in the organization knows that they're responsible for risk management. So while Wells Fargo, their issue was related to incentive pay, their pay incentivized bad behavior, that's really more of an operational risk. But culturally, nobody, even though there was all this pressure that the different representatives felt, nobody felt like they could say anything. So that's the flag. Southwest, that was an operational failure that I'm sure everybody, maybe some people even experienced this last holiday. And then of course there's Enron, which was such a colossal failure of enterprise risk management that it doesn't even exist anymore. So, Wells Fargo, Southwest, Volkswagen, they all recovered. It didn't doom their enterprise, but Enron had so many issues. They had operational failure, they had financial reporting failure, they had compliance failure. They just probably shouldn't have recovered from it. So that's what I would.
Great, thanks, Christina. So we have 4 minutes for Roberta and 4 minutes for Bernie. Roberta, we'll start with you. You're in one of those divisions that straddles the first and second line as the interim administrative services division manager. So you oversee budget, contract management, procurement, other business functions where you're implementing those functions, but also making sure they're compliant. You've also overseen programs in human resources. Does the fact that LACERA doesn't have a formal compliance program mean that LACERA doesn't practice compliance overall? And what will be the benefits of implementing a formal compliance program at LACERA?
Great, thank you, Steve. So although LACERA does not have a formal compliance program in place, it has established functional compliance throughout the organization within each division. So as was mentioned, compliance includes the policies and procedures in each division and particularly focuses on the laws and mandates that govern LACERA's day-to-day business. This includes keeping current with changes in those rules, regulations, and applicable laws, and to develop policies and procedures to comply with them. And some of the compliance initiatives in this functional compliance that LACERA state is in right now, some of the compliance initiatives that have been implemented include the ethics hotline, published a code of ethical conduct. Internal audit, like as Richard mentioned, conducts an annual risk assessment. We have established internal controls throughout each of the divisions, the auditing of processes and procedures, and again, as was mentioned, the policy committee has been established. And there are several examples of this functional compliance that I've observed and experienced while being the interim admin services manager. And one of these is contract management. Contract audits are conducted to define the business compliance and the contract terms, assuring that the stakeholders are fulfilling their obligations and adhering to the value of the contracts. And this is checked when we're issuing payments against those contracts. Another example is our business continuity plan, which was also mentioned. In the last several years, we've really strengthened that plan. We've conducted tabletop exercises in different areas of the organization. The last one that was conducted was at each division level to test their divisional business continuity plan. And so that is something that it might not be a rule or a regulation, but it's very, very important that we have those procedures in place and that we have them documented. And so that would be part of the functional compliance. And then as my role in human resources, as the training coordinator, as was mentioned earlier in the DEI, we have, the legal mandate or requirement to have sexual harassment prevention training every 2 years for supervisors and staff. And so those are just a couple of quick examples. And then, Steve, you asked about the benefits of implementing a formal compliance plan or program at LACERA. And the greatest benefit would be to protect LACERA from becoming a victim of waste, fraud, and abuse. And it serves as LACERA's ounce of prevention. So this benefits the organization as a whole, and it also benefits all the staff who do the work to accomplish LACERA's mission. So let's look at it in terms of the organization. It creates a structure around compliance obligations that includes staff education, auditing and reporting, among other things. It creates a central collection point where all the compliance and risk documents and activities are stored, and so that they can be easily accessed when LACERA is required to provide proof of an effective compliance program. It also helps to understand the risks and proactively mitigate them before a crisis arises. It helps to avoid monetary loss and legal penalties resulting from non-compliance to laws and regulations. It avoids damage to LACERA's reputation. If LACERA is not adhering to the laws, regulations, policies, and procedures due to a lack of staff's knowledge of these standards when they're doing their day-to-day work, that could directly impact LACERA's reputation in the community, with our vendors, with our members, with our staff. It creates a culture of transparency, and this discourages misconduct and leads to a higher detection because staff are encouraged to report potential violations. It helps to deter violations of the laws, rules, and regulations. And as Mr. Kehoe stated this morning, what can be done from this? What can be done to keep this from happening in the future? And so those are the things that the compliance program helps to bring to the surface. And most importantly, it fosters a workplace culture that values integrity and ethical conduct. And so it also has a direct benefit to staff. Staff are provided training that help them to know about the laws and the rules and the regulations and the procedures that affect their day-to-day work. And this helps them to know what is the right thing to do. And not only that, why is it the right thing to do? That helps them in the future when they have to make decisions, when those situations come up to them, and they have the opportunity to go back and think about the training that they received and why this rule or why this law is in place and why they need to adhere to it. It also helps to increase employee engagement because they're equipped with the knowledge to do their job, to do it well, and they know what's expected of them. Staff are all trained on compliance so that all divisions, all staff are working together to maintain these established standards as we move toward our mission. It can help with recruiting and retaining staff, particularly those who choose to work for an organization that has a commitment to do the right thing. And staff feel comfortable in raising concerns and trust the reporting system to address the issues that they raise. So these are only a few benefits that a formal compliance program brings to LACERA, both organizationally and to the staff, but just as a quick overview. Thank you.
Great answer, Roberta, and great answers by all the panelists so far. No pressure, Bernie. In your many years of experience at LACERA, you've been involved in many process improvements. You developed systems in the benefits division to ensure the proper calculation of benefits. You conceived of the process management group idea, and now in the quality assurance and metrics division, you are overseeing systems to audit benefit calculations and develop ways of measuring performance. What are your lessons learned and how are they applicable to enhancing LACERA's organization-wide compliance and risk management?
Thank you, Richard. Well, from my experience in championing operational initiatives, I think there are certain principles that were sprinkled throughout the presentation today that are worth emphasizing again. First of all, for any successful initiative, we need to have a clear vision. We need to know what we're trying to achieve, what future state we want to achieve, and then we are able to articulate objectives based on that. We need to formulate a good structure and position this new function or initiative within the organizational structure so that we know where everything fits and that we're not stepping on anybody's toes or duplicating efforts. We need to make sure we have the right people assigned to do the work. And we can't just assume that somebody can take it as a side gig. We have to make sure that we take seriously the amount of resources required. and are prepared to commit to it. We need to have a clear definition of roles and segregation of duties if we're going to have the integrity of this initiative and are able to hold people accountable. We need to make sure that we have excellent training so that we can make sure that all of the information that we work with are up to date, accurate, consistent, and complete. And we also need to make sure that we select the right tools. Like any job, if you have the right tools, you can do it pretty well. If you don't have the right tools, it becomes insane. So we need to get tools, and preferably tools that are well integrated into our existing tool set. Because we want to make sure that these tools will help us to follow through, manage our workflows, provide the proper reporting to management and decision makers. And first and foremost, it has to become a tool for sustainability, cohesiveness, and sustainability for the future. So it doesn't go to the wayside as soon as we change the people leading the project. But of course, the final say is that we need to have a system for enforcing and following up on what we're trying to achieve. So we make sure that we're constantly making progress, never falling back, and improving wherever possible. So I would say these are the principles that I think we've seen in some of these slides. And I think those are the things we should need to focus on if we want to be successful in this and any other project.
Thanks, Bernie. I think the panelists did a great job of summarizing the key concepts that we were trying to convey today. This completes our presentation. We're happy to answer any questions.
Perfect. And I think this just scrapes the surface of what we need to get into and focus on. Okay, so I will open it up for good of the order. We're at the 4 o'clock hour, but we'll open it up for good of the order for anything the panelists discussed or any other topics that were discussed.
I just would like to
Anyone
thank
dare.
staff for a great day.
Thank you. Okay, perfect. So I've been told that Bonnie is your go-to for anything you need validated for your cars, for validations. And
I just had
I will-
I just had one item that I needed to clarify one comment that I made earlier about HR.
This is our errors and omissions policy in place right now.
We did pay that premium, right? No, I just wanted to make sure that I reiterated that. I think I said that we don't have any connection with the county in terms of our HR. We do use a county vendor to do our online testing. And so it's really a contractual arrangement that we find is efficient at this particular point in time. So I wanted to make sure that I corrected that. And I just wanted to make one point on the compliance. The compliance issue or the program is not going to be an easy task, quite frankly. And one of the things that they didn't mention is that in my experience, division managers and operational managers don't like compliance officers. And we have to make sure that we have that we support it from the top and that we make sure that we're executing on the recommendations that are being made. So I don't want you to think that go away thinking that, everybody's going to be on board, because quite frankly, it's sort of like, everybody has a plan until somebody gets hit. And when an audit comes down and there's an operational issue that's raised, there's a tendency to circle the wagons. And so I'm aware of that. And I just wanted to make sure that you all, and the assessor's office was a perfect example where no one liked the compliance officer at the assessor's office. But I think that this group is mature enough, the management team is mature enough to understand that there is a role to be had and to be played by this compliance office. It's just going to make us better and stronger in the end. So thank you for that time.
And I take this presentation as setting the stage for future discussions in the boardroom as we look and we expand this program. Perfect. Then once again, validations are with Bonnie, and we will see everybody is at 9 o'clock tomorrow. So we'll see everybody tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Have a good night, everyone. Drive safe.